Hello, and welcome back to TED Summit EMEA Americas. Now, this session it's going to be broken into a number of videos as we've got a lot of material to review. Will be on the open source telecom software survey that we ran this year in 2021. Now, before I get going, I must thank the sponsors. That is Automart, Ava Network, GoContact, BroadVoice, they recently merged, Strollid, Radiosys, and Telnex. Without their support, this event simply does not happen. Now, as I mentioned, I'm going to be dividing it up into a number of sections. I'll review that in a minute. But let's just look back at what happened in the results from 2019 and 2020. So again, all the results are published. There's the links to the material. It's 3 surveys, so each year we've run a survey. We've learned a lot, we made some mistakes, and we tried to get better each year. So 2019 started with a broad review of most of the open source projects and some common deployment issues. The results are there. 2020, we filled in gaps, for example, in geography, contributions to projects, a deeper dive into hosting, redundancy, plus we did miss off some projects in the first survey, such as Dratio, ASTPP, RTP engine, etc. And then this year, we did a broad review again of all the projects. We did a focus with a general survey on security, serverless, telcos use of open source software, training, stir shaken, IoT, and adoption barriers. And there you can see the link to the survey. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to divide the presentations up into, this one will be a recapitulation of 2019, 2020. And then I'm going to run through in a separate video the general survey results. And then for each project, I'm going to do separate videos. This is just to help people get to the content they care about as fast as possible. As one of the feedback I got last year is doing a long presentation doesn't help anybody. So hopefully that will make it easier to get to the content you want. Plus, in these slides, I also include in the appendix the 2020 results. So you've got 2 for the price of 1 with this. Now, please note that both in the general survey, but also for the project surveys, if any of them received less than 5 responses, I don't show the data. That's simply because it's very difficult to infer, anything that's, statistically relevant, but also, that we can compare year to year. So, and you'll see, I show how many responses we get for each of the surveys. And also I compare it to the number of responses we had to previous years. So you get a feel for the data that's being, sort of is the source for the material that we're presenting. But anyway, let's get down to reviewing what happened in the past. So in 2019, we kicked off a survey, and this just shows the number of responses we had for each of the projects. So OSP is open source project, Asterix, FreeSwitch, Camaillo, OpenSIPs, and that shows the number of responses to each. Also, we had Rescom MobiSense, but of course, that was in the process of no longer being supported by Telestacks. So that's the reason why it had so few responses. There simply was no active community behind it at that point. I didn't know, but obviously the responses showed there was something going on. And we looked at a number of questions associated with the different projects. So here we asked the question, does the developer community make itself accessible? And we compared the 4 different projects. And as you can see, Camaillo, it has a very clear sort of board, separation between any commercial interests in the project. So it sits in very clear isolation. But as you can see, OpenSIPs is doing very well, in terms of making itself accessible for developers. So again, and I would say, these are quite exceptional results. You'll see later when we review some more of the projects. Asterix, of course, has been running for many, many years, 20 odd years. So as you would imagine, it's got a broader base. It's also got a broader community of people. So, when you're having people that are newbies, it can be a steep learning curve for these open source telecom projects. So that's why you see the spread. Also, back in 2019, there was some questions with FreeSwitch around SignalWire and the FreeSwitch project and what's going to happen. I mean, they've been resolved. I mean, the software's being updated. I think some of the concerns from back then are no longer valid. So again, each year there's contextual factors that impact, as well as overall maturity of the project. You'll see later when we review Wazo that initially, it was the early adopters, the people who loved the project. And then as the community developed and broadened, you can see the sort of the spread across the data gets broader. So again, it's got to look at the contextual factors around each of these results as well. We also asked how easy is it to engage with the community on new features. Again, you can see broad spread with asterisks because it's been around for so long. Very good performance from Kama-Elio, OpenSIPs. And, it's both a structural issue with both of these projects, but it's also the people. I can't stress enough, within the core team and the leadership within the core team, that's critical to the overall feel of an open source project. So, again, well done to both those teams. And again, you can see a broader spread with FreeSwitch, again, because it has so many different projects it's used for. But again, Asterisk for such a mature project is doing quite well in terms of ease of engaging with the community. Now, we also asked a question back in 2019 around how easy is it to find knowledgeable consultants? Now, as you can see, broad spread across all. What, how it is, you live and you learn. We have many different geographies. And as a result, some geographies, it's easier than others to find knowledgeable consultants. Also, what you find is in different regions, what they're looking for in terms of consultants can be quite different. As an example, in some regions, it's not just a consultant that understands Kama-Elio or FreeSwitch. It also has broad and deep VoIP understanding. So again, it's one of these where, I show the results, but the context around them matters intensely. So we learned a point back in 2019, we need to include geography, because then that reduces the spread when we look at the issues across each geography, whether it's Europe, North America, or the rest of the world. So from 2019, a few of the takeaways. For configuration management scripting, the answer is Ansible, and that is the dominant project. Now, I asked the question, should each project share popular scripts to aid adoption and setup? I really should have said, each project must share popular scripts. I asked the question, and it is, everybody's busy. It's just you adding in the features, doing the code, doing the documentation. These sort of nice to haves, I think, are important in making it easier for newbies to get into these projects. I mean, we all see it at many of the open source events. It's often the same people. We need to be seeing fresh blood. And this is why I have great respect for what Dave Horton's doing with Jambons. It's an open source project, very much making it as easy as possible for more web-centric developers to get in and start using open source telecom software. He sponsored TADHAC Global, where we have a broad base of developers, not just telco people, as he reaches out, and I've seen it on his Slack group for Jambons, the growth there and the broad range of people that are getting involved. I mean, this is, I think, a template for the whole industry. But anyway, let's get back to 2019 and reviewing the results. Other thing we saw was native cloud is not a popular choice. So people are really rolling their own with these deployments. And there's a range of reasons for that. And I'm going to explain them as we go through the rest of the survey. As I mentioned, geography is important. In fact, some in Europe were surprised at the size of the Asterix response. They were like, wow, is Asterix really that popular? And the answer is yes. I've been to Astricon a number of times. I've presented there. And you've got a broad base of developers and businesses, that are making good money, running their business in helping other enterprises deploy Asterix all around the world. And even channels. So it's not just geeks. These are people that resell and package up. So again, that creates a very rich and vibrant ecosystem. And there's still much we can do together as a global community to accelerate open source adoption. You'll see later when we look at geography, it's dominated by Europe and North America. And you'll see later also that China is a bit of a gap. Again, we'll review that in more detail, but there's a lot of work we can do together to really accelerate open source adoption for telecoms. And, excuse me, often these projects are used together. So it could be like Camma-Elio with Asterix, or OpenSIPs with FreeSwitch and Oiseau. So there's a whole range of ways in which the projects are wrapped together to solve specific problems. So that was 2019. Let's do a little bit of a review of what happened in 2020. So we got more responses, 87 responses, and we asked, well, where are you based? We should have done that on the first one. As you can see, Europe dominates, then North America. North America is the capital of programmable communications, but Europe is where many of the open source practitioners are. And as you can see, a whole range of different geographies, a relatively small group in Australia and New Zealand, but English language skills. Same with India, English language skills. So, unfortunately, the documentation, is in English. There's nothing we can do about that. It's lingua franca. But that does impact some of the other regions, particularly China. But again, we'll discuss what that means and how we can address that later. So that was where we started asking about region. Then we said, well, what are your main challenges in using open source software? And top one was finding knowledgeable consultants, then speed of response, because of course, the core team is in a different time zone to where it's being implemented, language barriers, documentation. You'll see it come through again and again, documentation. And it's a topic that I know for some people, it's like, look, our documentation is fine. The consultants we work with, they're happy with it. And that's great. But to expand the project, the documentation needs to be adequate for newbies. And also a lot of those newbies that maybe are more web-centric prefer videos to walls of text. So again, a part of the challenge is communicating in a way that's relevant for a broader base of developers. Now, what we were able to do, because we were asking about geography, is we were then able to look at the different geographies and see what's the challenge that they face. So with India, speed of response, because of multiple time zones. With Australia and New Zealand, of course, speed of response. Russia was language barriers. Central, South America was language barriers. Europe was finding the knowledgeable consultants. Same with North America. And as I mentioned, in both these regions, it's not just somebody that understands OpenSIPs or FreeSwitch or one of the many other projects, but also has deep VoIP expertise. So I don't want to sort of make people think it's just having experts on a particular project. It's a broader VoIP competence. And then distributed teams that are in multiple time zones, speed of response in Middle East with speed of response. So we can see that there's a clear demarcation based around geography on what's the key issue. But getting answers when you're in the middle of an implementation matters intensely to members of the community. So speed of response is something that we should be tackling. Finding knowledgeable consultants is a broader and more complex issue. Then we delve in a little deeper in terms of if you face language barriers, what's going to help? Well, of course, documentation in the local language. The challenge is for many open source projects, that's expensive. I mean, Google Translate is not good enough. I mean, just search on Google Translate fails just to see even basic common or garden phrases that just get mangled. I mean, you need a native speaker, and that costs money. So again, this is, it's a challenge. I don't pretend that, it's something that, there's an easy answer. I think, given, Twilio, has relatively limited non-English documentation. And let's face it, if any project, well, it's not a project, but if anyone has the cash to spend, it's them. So even they're keeping it pretty dominated on English language. So I don't pretend this is an easy or cheap one to solve. All I can say is, if there's a region that you're focusing on, where you have somebody on the team that has those local language skills, then it's a quick win to and let's face it, China, it's over 1 billion people. It is, I mean, there's cultural issues as well, but compared to many regions, it does seem to be relatively light on using open source software. So there could be some interesting opportunities there. Now, we also asked in 2020, do you provide consulting? So to understand, how are people making money? Because, open source software, it's free. So we then went in and got a whole range of responses. It was open format. So it wasn't like we were asking in particular region, so particular topics. So there's training, as you would imagine, but development and design across a whole range of applications and services, maintenance of VoIP networks, consulting in terms of general open source, so beyond just specific projects, more generally across open source software. And you can see here, security, network consulting, RTC design, experience, also premise architecture and networking and configuration. And that's still, for many companies, on-prem still matters, or we could call it edge, depending on your definition. Managed hosted VoIP networks, installation, customization, but also telco consulting as well came up, for example, IMS and Kubernetes, based on Kama-Elio. So that gives you a broad base of services that are being provided by the companies that are fulfilling this survey. So as you can see, many areas that people are making money based on the experience beyond just the open source project. It's more around VoIP, WebRTC, and real-time communications. Now, the reason we asked questions around serverless is back in 2019 at TAD Summit EMEA, we had several fintech companies present because we were looking at open banking and how it's been successful and how the principles could be applied to open telecoms. And they were seeing some of the presentations and seeing how we weren't implementing on serverless. We were, sort of rolling our own, and they were laughing. It's like, guys, you're yak shaving. Why are you doing all this work you don't need to do? So we were like, okay, so what's going on? Why are fintech taking one route while many of the companies within TAD Summit are not? And of course, serverless has its issues, especially for stateful communications. So there are limitations there. But again, it's one of those that we were like, okay, this seems to be a hot topic. Let's see as a community what's going on. So no plans was the dominant, evaluating, and then some have implemented, but I've got to be clear. They were using it, for example, in testing. They were using it, for example, in data analysis. So it wasn't in the core telecoms piece, in the media path. It was in functions around the core. So that's important to understand. Where they said they were implementing it, it wasn't for the core. Now, we also filled in some gaps, and I apologize to these projects that we didn't include you in the first survey. You know how it is. You make mistakes, you live, you learn. So with Dratio Jambons, we did review the strengths and weaknesses. And again, all kudos to the work of Dave Horton in all the strengths. The weaknesses are being addressed and have been addressed through this year. So again, it's really, I think this survey helps Dave in terms of prioritizing where he needs to focus, what gaps he needs to fill. And also it's great to see, it's a mix as always. You have your fans, you have your detractors, but it was nice to see, the future. Of course, there's, it's a new project. It takes, Asterix as an example. It takes 20 years to be considered, a stable, solid project. So, there's got a ways to go with Jambons, but, people do believe what he's doing is a game changer in CPaaS. So time is critical to confidence in open source projects. They need to prove that they're going to be here in the long term, because you're going to be running your business on that software. So that's, that means, you really need to believe it's going to be around for some time to come. Again, limited in terms of the number of responses, but you can see, for such a, small project that's basically just, Dave Horton at that time, it's great to see, some really, nice feedback. And of course, I'm on Jambon's Slack, so I get to see, the community, how it's grown, how lively it is. So again, it's great to see that commitment. We also reviewed RTP engine, its strengths, weaknesses, of course, stability, quality of the code. Of course, there you go, better documentation in the weaknesses. It's a common theme, especially when you're trying to expand and bringing in new people, because it is a bit of a geeky niche, and it takes some time for general developers to get their heads around some of the ideas and concepts. So that's why it's always going to be a struggle with documentation. But as a community, we need to bring in fresh blood. We need more and more developers using these projects in as many ways as possible. And then, of course, the future of SIP-wise within ALE is a question, but as always, it's the people behind the project. And as long as they're around and committed to the project's health is ensured. It's when those people disappear, that's when there's a challenge. And you see then, as we saw with Mobisense Rescom, how quickly, when the core team isn't supporting that project. I mean, the software's still there, but the problem is that, that software gets old, less relevant. There's less people that understand some of the compromises that were made in particular protocols. So as a result, it does tend to go stale quite quickly. As you can see, great results again across the community in terms of how active it is, in terms of its participation, how easy it is to engage. Again, a broad base of results, as you would expect, because you've got a broad base of people that are wanting to use it in a whole range of different ways, and you can't ensure all people are happy all of the time. We asked people in 2020, what should we focus on in the questionnaire for 2021? So the responses: overriding security, repeat the broader survey. People were a little perplexed at why are you just asking questions on Dratio? Why not, Asterix or OpenSIPs? I mean, we did explain, but you know how it is. More telco stuff. So we did include some questions, section on telco, but actually we got very few responses this year. So even though we did that piece of the survey, I don't include the results simply because there's not enough to be statistically meaningful. We also asked about API related features, for example, with Asterix, AMI. I got some nice feedback there. We tracked serverless, but I'll be honest, it sort of showed that as an industry, we've come to a conclusion on that particular technology. So it's unlikely that we'll include that in next year's survey and make it annual to track progress of the projects. Now, I'll go into when we review the 2021 results for the general survey. I think what we most probably will do is we'll have like a general survey, and that'll vary in size between sort of very small and sort of medium size. And every other year we'll do project surveys, because actually the differences year to year in the projects is quite small. It's something that I think every 2 years we can track. And for 2021, because we had such a big general survey, people were pooped by the time they'd finished that. So I think, we didn't get as many project surveys as we have had in previous years. So that's why we might sort of, every other year do the project surveys and make the general surveys skinnier so that people can spend their time in, how they feel the project's going. And then, every year we have something that looks at the sort of general issues facing the community, but the time spent on that will vary depending on whether or not we're doing the project surveys in conjunction with that. So that's the plan going forward. Again, you live and you learn. So that's the first piece covering what we had in 2019, 2020. Now we're going to move on to the general survey results, and that's going to be in a separate video. So thank you.